I'm Karthik. So I'm software engineer at Minayo, and I work primarily around initiatives in Apache Iceberg and AI. And today's talk is about Agentic AI meets Iceberg, the future of scalable enterprise data intelligence. So TLD is, in short, the takeaway from this talk would be to understand the relevance of AI for the enterprise, and to understand the relevance of Iceberg when it comes to like enterprise AI strategy, and how Iceberg can become a key pillar or a center pillar to adopt AI in enterprises. So let's start with the topics that we're going to discuss today. And we'll start with like why now and why we are at an inflection point when it comes to AI, and how like data and AI are very much correlated, and so that we can just tie it back to the relevance of Iceberg and how it can become like a gateway for adoption of AI in enterprises. And we'll start with how like data have become siloed, is extremely siloed and fragmented across multiple sources, and how potentially Iceberg is opens up an opportunity to consolidate it and create a new gateway for AI. So, as we all know that AI is outpacing enterprises in terms of the spend, and of course, like it's not pretty clear on how entrepreneurs are able to derive the return of investment or the return of value for all the investments that they are doing. So one of the key reasons why the expenditure or the spend does not match the value or outcome, or one of the hindrance to be able to not achieve full value out of your investment for AI is the fragmentation of data, or the inaccessibility of data for AI. So as we all know, like the context is everything for AI. Your models are only as good as the context that's available. Now, in a modern enterprise, like the data is scattered all across different sources, we'll touch up on how and why. And this becomes one of the key reasons why, though in spite of expenditures or all the efforts that's been invested by enterprises, the outcome doesn't yet match, all the effort that's been like today you could witness in an enterprise or the AI strategy inside enterprises. So the core truth or the important fact to consider here is that in the AI movement, like the data determines who leads. So which means the quality of the data and the consolidation of the context of your enterprise is what that will lead to an effective AI strategy. So the data is the currency of the AI economy, right? Like, so AI is no more a theoretical concept, and it's become a key pillar of strategy for all enterprises. And you could see, some staggering numbers that we might witness in enterprises as of today. And but again, touching upon the fact that adding some numbers onto the same point that I discussed, in spite of billions of dollars spent, like the real delivered result or impactful result that you could witness is no more match the expenditure, right? And the I think one of the analogy to see over here is that an AI model is for an AI model, the data is very very critical. It's pretty, the good analogy to consider is like a brain and memory, right? It's the same correlation that data and AI model has. And I think the core essence that what I'm trying to convey is that the data is extremely critical, and it's extremely important in order for successful adoption and application of AI in enterprises. So on one aspect of data is the accessibility of the data, or is the data readily available, and is it consolidated across, yeah, the data which is otherwise fragmented, is it consolidated and accessible to the AI? And that's where the data infrastructure plays a critical role, right? So the infrastructure that powers your entire context of your organization has to be scalable, has to be performant, has to be designed in a manner that it should be able to home, or it should be able to in consolidate, or to be able to store, or to be able to bring together or connect together the entire context of your enterprise in one place. So as we touched upon, this is a hardest problem that we witness in any enterprise, that you have the entire context of the business is spread and is fragmented across a lot of sources. So this is pretty clear. Some of the data would be inside your databases, which is your transactional business data, and you will see analytical data that typically that you use Snowflake or Databricks, any other query engine to provide analytical insights. That would be inside your data lakes or data warehouses, right? And then you have different applications. For instance, you have typically use HubSpot for marketing, then you have Salesforce for sales related data. And so where a lot of the critical business insights are locked inside these applications. And then you also have on-prem systems like where uh, business critical data is actually locked within. And so it's a clear cut example that across these applications, your transactional databases, your data lakes, like a lot of the business context and the context that is really important for the AI is siloed and it's fragmented, right? So because of this, the AI is like the AI models really do not see the entire context of your business, right? So if you're using AI to accelerate your business to make your business more efficient, it's quite impossible, if all the relevant business context is spread across so many different systems, right? And another challenge is that AI, while it requires the structured business context that you typically store in transactional databases, it might also need unstructured documents, which are referenced from your transactional systems. For example, it could be your invoices, the billing information documents, or legal documents. It could be the security feed, security camera feed, like if it comes to any kind of security information. The gist here is that the context for AI is not just structured, it could also be unstructured. So the future is more and more heading towards like AI be having to have access to both the structured and unstructured context, and without which, it has only partial visibility to your business context, and that makes it extremely hard for it to be effective while it take decisions for your business. Now, let's come back to the original topic that we are discussing. And so that is how Iceberg opens up an opportunity, to solve this problem. So Iceberg, like, firstly, like, brings in the new dimension to bring transactional or potentially, structured data into object storage, right? So object storage was historically was only meant to store unstructured data, which is your images, your documents, or backups or archives, so or VM images, right? So basically, blobs of unstructured data was typically meant to be stored in object storage, and it wasn't a conventional wisdom that you would store structured data inside object storages. So while data like your database backups in some form did represent structured data, but this data was not stored in a standard format. So every database backup had its own format. It would become compressed or archived in its own way, and there was no standardized manner in which you would store the transactional business context at all. So this, for the longest time, though object storage was scalable, it could like have petabytes of data. And in Minerva today, we have customers who have even exabyte scale deployment, where it's like so scalable to store your entire organization's business context. There was no standardized way to bring in the structured data, because most of the business context is actually hidden within the structured data. So the transaction that you perform, the entire business context is typically stored inside your structured data. Even the context around unstructured data is typically stored in your structured data. For instance, like, let's imagine that all your photos on Instagram is actually stored in the object storage, right? So just the images alone, without the context around the image, it's far less useful. Like, the context around the image, like, who's the user, what's the location, and what's the post, who are the friends who are tagged. So all of this context that is related to the unstructured data is actually logged and stored in structured data. So without this context of structured data around the unstructured data available to the AI cannot be really effective. So this is what that plagued the data that's stored in object storage historically, right? Historically, object storages were primarily seen as a source of storage, or an infrastructure layer that is meant to store unstructured images, videos, or blobs of archives or backups, but it was never a place which was conventionally considered as, a system to store structured transactional data which contains the schema. Now, Iceberg opens up this opportunity for object storage systems, right? So this helps you to potentially bank upon the ability of object storage to scale, but this time not to just store unstructured data, but also to store the structured data. And this wider adoption of Iceberg in enterprises now opens up an avenue where Iceberg need not just be an analytical layer, but can potentially be a source, or like a way or a gateway for to bring entire organization's business context into one place, right? So now, why does this matter, right? So as I said, it's very, very important for agentic AI to have a destination where it can have access to the entire organization's context in one place, to be able to effectively like provide intelligence on, for enterprise data. So if the data is siloed across multiple sources, it's extremely hard for these AI agents to be able to have the entire view, or a 360 view of your data, to be able to effectively use it for your AI strategy. Now, while in Iceberg, it's kind of a way or a format for it to store structured data. I think the immediate question that I might ask is like, how can also Iceberg unify unstructured data, right? So if you could see this diagram, while we have a table wherein we have the columns on the table, it mentions different aspects or different information about the metadata. So where one of the columns that you could see points directly to an image, which is stored as an link to a object inside the object storage. So this is how exactly the structured data or a tabular data within Iceberg can directly reference unstructured data. And so it does two things now. One is that the rest of the columns, in the Iceberg table provides context around that image. So you have the rich context around the unstructured data, which was previously not available in one place. And it also now provides your pointer to the actual unstructured data. So this way, while it could be images, it could be videos, it could be documents, it could be any of the unstructured data, need not be stored in isolation without the context around them. By storing these references to unstructured data within your Iceberg tables, the Iceberg tables now become the source of truth for not just a structured transactional business data, but also like some a unifying factor for even unstructured data, which contains critical context for AIs to access and to provide intelligence on top of the data that's present in your enterprise. So here is the gist now. Now with Apache Iceberg, you need to think differently, right? The old mental model for Apache Iceberg was that Apache Iceberg was a format that was meant to store analytical data, structured data, which potentially should be used to perform analytical queries to build analytical dashboards, right? Now, you have to grow out of this mindset and consider the new reality where Iceberg is not just a layer, to store data for analytical purposes, for to perform queries on the data, but also as a gateway which provides the universal context for your AI for your entire organization, right? So again, summing all of this up, historically, like when we moved from warehouses to data lakes to data lake house now, I think the primary purpose or the use case here was that this was meant to be used for analytical purposes, right? So even before we entered the era of warehouses, we were using databases for analytical purpose, which proves to be really expensive and slow. That's when we moved to the specialized system called warehouses, which was designed from ground up specifically for analytics, right? And data warehouses proved to be really hard to scale, and eventually like we transitioned to the world of data lakes, where you would store where we disaggregated the storage and the compute layer, and data is now moved, potentially can be moved to a specialized system like object storage in data lakes, right? But then the recent evolution or the new evolution, because of a lot of the shortcomings of data lakes, today we are in the era of data lake houses, right? But historically, through the transitions from databases to data warehouses to data lakes and today to data lake houses, it was all meant for one purpose. The purpose and the use case, because of the evolution happened is because of analytics, right? So analytics is the primary use case over here. So, and that's how we perceive Iceberg as today, right? The layer where you store all your analytical data to be able to like provide critical insights using SQL analytics or to provide dashboards, what you would previously do with data warehouses like Snowflake. Um, but the new reality, what we need to embrace, or the ice through which we need to witness Iceberg, is not just restricting Iceberg typically for the analytical layer, but we should more on consider Iceberg as a layer which unifies the entire context of your organization, where it can connect both the structured and unstructured data, and it becomes like a unifying layer where the data which is siloed across different sources, it could potentially be, let's say, your marketing data inside HubSpot, it could be a sales data from Salesforce, it could be a transactional data from your transactional databases, it could be even your analytical data that's stored inside your data warehouses, but also like the call recordings, the transcript, and entire context surrounding. So typically becomes like a layer where you can bring in the data from different systems, which is locked in different sources, but contains critical business information, which is extremely important for your AI. Now, once Iceberg becomes the destination for your entire business context, to unify your entire business context, it can now act as a gateway for effective enterprise AI applications, because now it can contain all the context which is otherwise spread across or siloed across different systems, where it's extremely hard to apply AI on each one of these individual systems. It's far better, it's far easier to centralize the context across your organization inside Iceberg, inside object storage. It's much easier to scale. Data is stored in a standard format. If you bring all this data as Iceberg tables into an object storage system, and then use that as a gateway to provide access to your AI, and to provide your entire organization's business context and awareness to the AI. Okay, I think that sums up pretty much what you want to discuss, the relevance of Iceberg, in applying effective AI strategy to an enterprise, and why it's a unification layer that can become the central pillar for your AI strategy. Thank you.